Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Thursday, March 12, 2026.
And today really marks a pivotal moment in modern history. I mean, we are exactly 12 days into a conflict that has completely, irreparably shattered this whole illusion of a quick surgical war.
Yeah, that illusion is gone.
It's completely gone. The events of late February and early March of 2026 have upended the global economy. They've redefined modern military strategy and really exposed some deep structural fractures in international alliances.
Right, the ripple effects are moving way faster than the official narratives can even contain them.
Exactly. What we're witnessing right now is the real-time collapse of the conventional rules of engagement. It's a profound shift in the geopolitical landscape, and the velocity of this crisis is something we have to examine under a microscope today.
And to do that properly, I actually need to speak directly to you, the listener, for a second. Because today's deep dive is built on a massive stack of field reports, geopolitical analyses, and domestic political investigations that we've spent the entire week verifying.
Right, cross-referencing every single data point.
Exactly. And because we are looking at a live, ongoing conflict, the material we're covering today contains some highly polarized, politically charged claims. We are pulling hard data from left-wing analysts, right-wing analysts, statements from international actors, and dispatches from foreign governments.
All over the map, really.
Everywhere. So we want to explicitly state right up front that we are entirely impartial here. We are taking absolutely no sides in this conflict. We are simply acting as your investigative guides. Our entire mission for this deep dive is just to lay out the hard data, examine the competing narratives found in these reports, and show you the mechanics of what is actually happening.
Yeah, without endorsing any of these viewpoints or the governments involved, in an environment that's just overwhelmed by intensive information campaigns from every possible direction, our job is strict synthesis.
Right.
We take these disparate data points, lay them out on the table, and look at the underlying architecture of the situation. So I think we should start with the most visceral, immediate data we have from the ground, right?
Yeah, let's get into the tactical reality of the conflict's opening hours. Specifically, the ensuing public relations fallout regarding civilian casualties. Let's pull up the hard facts from the very first day of this intervention.
The initial kinetic action.
Right, which included a catastrophic strike on an Iranian girls' school. The death toll reported from the ground is just devastating. We're looking at between 153 to 175 casualties.
It's a massive loss of life.
It is. Now, the initial official claim coming out of Washington, which was directly echoed and amplified by President Donald Trump, was that an Iranian Tomahawk missile had gone off course and caused this destruction.
And the moment that claim hit the wires, military logisticians and defense analysts worldwide essentially froze.
Yeah, they were stunned.
Because the technical specifics of that statement immediately undermined its credibility, like instantly.
I've got the analysis right here from military expert Colonel Douglas Macgregor, and he points out that the official claim is a literal technical impossibility.
Yep.
Macgregor highlighted a fundamental fact of defense manufacturing, which is that Tomahawk cruise missiles are exclusively designed and manufactured by the United States defense contractor Raytheon.
Right. Iran does not possess Tomahawks. They do not have the launch platforms for them. They don't have the software architecture to guide them, and they certainly don't manufacture them domestically.
A Tomahawk has a highly specific flight profile, right? And a specific radar signature.
Exactly. To claim Iran fired one is, it's akin to claiming a foreign adversary attacked you using a classified proprietary stealth bomber that only your own military owns. This doesn't make any sense.
And furthermore, subsequent internal investigations from the Pentagon ended up confirming the obvious, which is that it was, in fact, a U.S. strike.
Right. They had to walk it back.
Yeah.
But the underlying reason for that strike is where the narrative shift really occurs. The reporting indicates this mass casualty event was potentially due to flawed automated targeting systems.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back on the framing here just a bit.
Okay, go ahead.
We know the military uses highly advanced algorithmic targeting systems to process vast amounts of battlefield data quickly. When you initiate a massive bombing campaign, especially one relying on autonomous or semi-autonomous sensor fusion, isn't a tragic margin of error just the inevitable reality of modern combat? Like, is this really a systemic failure or just the brutal fog of war?
Well, the fog of war is the standard defense utilized by military planners, sure. But we have to look at how these specific algorithmic models actually function. This isn't just human error, It's a systemic hallucination by the targeting software itself.
What do you mean by hallucination in this context?
Think about a self-driving car. If you deploy an unverified, fully automated vehicle into a crowded pedestrian zone at high speed, the technology might be capable of processing 1 million data points a second, but it entirely lacks human contextual judgment.
Right, it doesn't understand nuances.
Exactly. If that car's optical sensors misinterpret the shape of a child's stroller as a debris obstacle and swerves into a crowd, the collateral damage is entirely predictable. In a military context, an automated targeting system might read the heat signature or the structural dimensions of a school building.
And mistake it for a target.
Right. Lacking human verification, it matches it to a pre-programmed profile of a munitions depot. When you deploy that system without rigorous human oversight, a tragedy like the school strike isn't a glitch. It is a statistical inevitability of the autonomous architecture you chose to rely on.
Wow. And the fallout from that technological failure was immediate. Let's look at White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's press conference following the Pentagon's admission.
That was a tense briefing.
Very. Instead of addressing the failure of the targeting systems or the tragic loss of life, she deflected questions about the school strike entirely. She literally told reporters to direct their inquiries to the quote-unquote Department of War.
Which is a very deliberate phrasing.
Yeah, and then she actively accused the New York Times of harassment for repeatedly pressing the issue of the 153 casualties.
Which brings us to the strategic disaster of day one. Because when you launch a foreign intervention, the stated geopolitical goal is almost always framed as the liberation of an oppressed populace from a tyrannical regime, right?
Right, winning hearts and minds.
Exactly. You are trying to win over the citizens. But when your opening salvo results in the deaths of over 150 schoolgirls, and your immediate response is an easily disprovable technical claim about a Raytheon-manufactured missile, you lose the narrative instantly.
Instantly.
The deflection by the press secretary signals an inability to control either the battlefield technology or the subsequent information space. You alienate the very population you are claiming to save within the first 24 hours.
And that narrative collapse dictates how the adversary responds. Iran did not respond symmetrically. They didn't try to match American air power plane for plane in the sky.
No, they couldn't.
Right. So they pivoted immediately to the economic battlefield, which brings us to the Strait of Hormuz. I want to lay out the hard economic data here for you. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow, 21-mile-wide waterway that handles roughly 20% of the entire world's liquid petroleum trade.
It is the absolute jugular of the global economy.
It is the ultimate geographic choke point. If you restrict that strait, you don't just impact energy markets.
You trigger a cascading failure across global manufacturing, logistics, agriculture, everything.
And we saw that impact instantly. Following the outbreak of this conflict, global oil prices immediately spiked to an astonishing $120 a barrel.
Which is just punishing for consumers.
Yeah. It has since cooled slightly, currently fluctuating around $83 a barrel. But the long-term outlook is incredibly grim. I have the analysis here from energy experts Javier Blas and Ryan Grimm. They note that the Department of Energy is projecting that global oil prices will not normalize until mid-2027 at the earliest.
Over a year away.
Yeah, and this projection is based on hard physical maritime attacks. We have reports of 3 major commercial ships being hit in the Strait recently. One of those was a Thai-flagged vessel transporting cargo to India. That specific attack resulted in a severe diplomatic rebuke from New Delhi aimed at the escalating regional instability.
And the mechanism of Iran's response here is what really deserves deep scrutiny. Because they are not enacting a blanket, indiscriminate blockade of the Strait.
They're being selective?
They're executing a highly calculated, selective embargo strategy. If we look at the analysis by geopolitical expert Pepe Escobar, he details how Iran is deliberately allowing commercial ships from friendly or neutral nations, specifically China, Russia, and Bangladesh, to pass through the waterway completely unmolested.
Just waving them through.
Exactly. Meanwhile, they are entirely blocking, harassing, or targeting vessels tied to the United States, Israel, and their respective economic allies.
I want to break down how they actually achieve that selective embargo, though, because maritime shipping is incredibly complex. Ships often fly flags of convenience. I mean, a ship might be owned by a Greek magnate, insured in London, flagged in Panama, and carrying American cargo. How do they know who to hit?
Well, Iran utilizes sophisticated tracking. They intercept automatic identification system, or AIS, signals, and combine that with naval intelligence to determine the ultimate beneficial ownership and the actual destination of the cargo.
That requires a lot of coordination.
It does. And by selectively keeping the Strait open for some and closed for others, Iran is engaging in brilliant asymmetric warfare. They are effectively fracturing the global coalition against them by offering an economic off-ramp.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. If you are a nation heavily reliant on imported energy, and Iran says, hey, you can have your oil, your economy can survive as long as you do not support the U.S. intervention, that is an incredible piece of geopolitical leverage. It forces sovereign nations to choose between their theoretical diplomatic alliance with Washington and their own immediate domestic economic survival.
Let me bring in the military reality being presented by the U.S. administration right now, though. President Trump has publicly claimed that the United States military has completely dominated the waterway.
Yeah, I saw those statements.
He stated that U.S. forces have destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels and sent an estimated 50 to 60 Iranian ships to the bottom of the sea. The administration is essentially painting a picture of total naval supremacy, suggesting they are successfully clearing the strait for safe passage.
And that claim fundamentally misinterprets the nature of modern naval combat in confined littoral waters. Let's look at the analysis by military expert Matthew Ho. He explains that the U.S. Navy might very well be sinking dozens of aging Iranian patrol boats. That might be entirely factual.
Right.
But Iran doesn't actually need a traditional blue water navy or even physical sea mines in the water to close the Strait of Hormuz. Their shore-based infrastructure is the real threat here.
What kind of infrastructure?
They utilize highly advanced automated drone swarms and precision-guided anti-ship ballistic missiles. And these are launched from mobile platforms hidden deep within the Zagros Mountains along the coastline. You can't just sink a mountain range.
This is where we have to talk about how maritime insurance actually dictates global trade. Because if the insurance companies in London refuse to underwrite the cargo, the ships simply do not sail.
Period.
Right. It doesn't matter if there are 5 U.S. Navy destroyers escorting them. If they aren't insured, they stay in port.
And that is the core mechanism of the chokehold. Commercial shipping is governed by actuarial math, not military bravado. The Lloyd's of London Joint War Committee designates high-risk areas. When the threat of shore-based asymmetric weapons rises, the war risk premiums for insuring a massive oil tanker skyrocket.
To the point where it's just not viable.
Exactly. To the point where the voyage becomes mathematically unprofitable. A $20,000 shore-based loitering munition can critically damage a $100 million cargo vessel.
Yeah.
The physical sinking of 60 Iranian speedboats does not negate the fact that a mobile missile launcher parked 50 miles inland can render the entire waterway completely uninsurable.
Wow.
You don't need to sink every commercial ship. You just need to alter the financial risk calculus of the global shipping conglomerates.
And that economic blockade is rapidly bleeding into regional military instability. The conflict is clearly no longer contained to the coastline of Iran. Let's track the geographical spread of this war across the Middle East. U.S. military bases across the entire Gulf region are actively under fire right now.
It's expanding fast.
We are looking at specific, confirmed attacks on installations in Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and the strategic Omani port of Sulla. But the expansion isn't just in the Gulf. I want to highlight an absolute bombshell report from investigative journalist Victor Hugo Vaca Jr.
This report is wild.
It really is. He uncovered the existence of a secret Israeli drone base located far to the north in the Republic of Georgia.
Geographic implications of that are just staggering.
And it gets more complex. According to Vaca's reporting, this clandestine drone base is allegedly hidden within a UNESCO World Heritage Site, utilizing international cultural protection as a literal shield. And it is reportedly being used to launch strikes across borders into Azerbaijan and Turkey.
So if we connect those Gulf attacks and this revelation in Georgia to the broader strategic picture, the grand strategy becomes visible. Let's look at the analysis by Dr. David Gualalu. He argues this conflict was never solely about Iran or its internal politics.
What's the bigger picture then?
It is fundamentally about the global balance of power, specifically regarding choking China's access to vital energy resources. By destabilizing the broader Middle East and threatening the flow of oil, you are striking directly at the heart of the Chinese economic engine, which relies heavily on Gulf energy.
But look at the cost to regional allies, The Gulf states nations like the UAE and Bahrain have hosted these massive U.S. military installations for decades. They spend billions on U.S. defense contracts, believing it provided them with an impenetrable security umbrella.
And they are currently experiencing a terrifying rude awakening.
Yeah.
Hosting those U.S. bases has not insulated them from the conflict. It has explicitly painted a target on their backs.
Yeah.
Iran's message to the Gulf monarchies is brutally clear. If you allow your territory to be used as a staging ground for weapons striking our soil, your critical infrastructure, your airports, your desalination plants, your financial centers, is forfeit.
Which forces us to ask if the United States military is stretching itself past the breaking point here. We have deeply concerning reports right now regarding the global defense grid. The United States is actively cannibalizing its own Fatty and Patriot missile defense systems from South Korea to patch up the porous air defense networks in the Middle East.
We really need to explain why that is so critical. For those who don't know, THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. It is one of the most advanced, sophisticated anti-ballistic missile systems on the planet, designed to intercept incoming threats in their terminal phase.
Right, and it uses hit-to-kill kinetic energy, meaning it physically collides with the incoming missile rather than using an explosive warhead. It requires an incredibly complex radar infrastructure to operate.
Exactly the kind of infrastructure you desperately need when positioned next to a volatile, nuclear-armed neighbor like North Korea.
Yeah, taking it out of there is a huge risk.
By physically unbolting these THAAD and Patriot batteries from the Pacific Theater and dragging them to the Persian Gulf, the United States is essentially leaving vital global theaters exposed. They are degrading their overarching global defense posture in a desperate attempt to sustain a localized, rapidly expanding conflict.
It is a logistical nightmare.
It illustrates a terrifying reality. American interceptor stockpiles are finite, and they are being rapidly depleted by cheap, mass-produced asymmetric drone swarms.
So if their shore-based missiles are outsmarting naval fleets and cheap drones are draining multi-million-dollar interceptor stockpiles, it forces us to ask a fundamental question about the core U.S. objective. Why didn't taking out their supreme leader break their chain of command?
This was the whole plan, right?
Exactly. The stated primary objective from Washington on day one was regime change achieved via decapitation of the top leadership. On February 28th, the 86-year-old supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was assassinated in a targeted strike.
The geopolitical calculus in Washington heavily relied on the assumption that the Iranian regime was basically a fragile house of cards.
And they had data to support that assumption. Let's look at the analysis by activist Elika Laban. She references extensive, highly credible polling data from the Gaman Institute based in the Netherlands. Their research showed that the regime historically hovered at only about 10% genuine support among the broader population.
10% is incredibly low.
Decades of economic mismanagement, brutal crackdowns on protests, and strict social controls had deeply alienated the public. So the prevailing assumption among Western intelligence agencies was that Khamenei's death would be the ultimate spark. It would trigger a massive, uncontrollable grassroots uprising that would organically sweep the regime away from the inside.
But that uprising never materialized. Instead, the power structure smoothly and rapidly transitioned to his son, Mujtaba Khamenei. This represents one of the most profound psychological and sociological miscalculations by Western intelligence in modern history.
I want to look at the analysis from regional experts Vali Nasser and David Hurst to understand why the public didn't revolt, because it seems counterintuitive on the surface.
Well, Nasser and Hurst point out a fundamental truth of human psychology in wartime. While the Iranian populace may have deeply despised the clerical regime under normal peacetime circumstances, the calculus of survival changed overnight.
When the bombs start falling.
When foreign bombs start falling, everything shifts. The sight of their cities burning, their civilian infrastructure collapsing, and ancient historical sites being targeted triggered a deep-seated, incredibly powerful wave of Persian nationalism.
It is the ultimate rally around the flag effect.
Absolutely. The nature of the conflict transformed in the minds of the everyday citizen. It was no longer a domestic referendum on the popularity of the Islamic Republic or the morality of the morality police. It suddenly became a fight for the physical, existential survival of the Iranian nation itself against a foreign aggressor.
Right.
When an external force threatens to erase your country from the map, domestic political grievances are temporarily shelved in favor of collective survival.
Wait, what about the reformists, though?
Right.
For the last 2 decades, Western media and diplomats have constantly talked about this massive, highly organized reformist faction within Iran. These are the politicians and citizens who were actively pushing for moderation, for easing social restrictions, and for long-term economic integration with the West. Where did they go when the supreme leader was killed?
That is the tragic irony of the decapitation strategy. The intervention effectively discredited and neutralized the reformist faction overnight.
How so?
Consider the leadership style of the older 86-year-old Khamenei. While certainly hostile to the West, he operated on a doctrine of strategic patience and calculated restraint. It's crucial to note that he famously halted the development of actual nuclear weapons, and he strictly restricted the development of ballistic missiles to a 2,000-kilometer range.
Explicitly preventing the military from building 5,000-kilometer intercontinental weapons that could threaten Europe or the U.S. mainland.
Precisely. So by assassinating the cautious, calculating older leadership, the United States inadvertently cleared out the ideological roadblocks for the most extreme elements of the military.
The power vacuum elevated a younger, far more aggressive, and highly risk-tolerant generation within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
Exactly. And we need to be clear about what the IRGC actually is. They are not just a branch of the military. They are a massive military-industrial conglomerate.
They touch everything.
Everything. They control vast sectors of the Iranian economy, including telecommunications, major construction projects, and lucrative underground smuggling routes. They operate their own intelligence apparatus and their own naval forces.
And this younger generation of IRGC commanders who have now been handed absolute operational control following the decapitation strike were forged in the immediate trauma of this war.
Yet they do not believe in strategic patience. They believe diplomacy with the West is a proven failure. They operate on a doctrine of immediate, overwhelming, and asymmetric retaliation. By trying to cut off the head of the snake, Western planners didn't break the command structure, they radicalized it.
Right, they made it worse.
They replaced a cautious adversary with an entire military-industrial complex that feels it has absolutely nothing to lose and is willing to escalate the conflict to the absolute maximum degree.
Which forces us to pivot to the final and arguably most disturbing piece of this entire puzzle. With the foreign policy strategy mired in unforeseen chaos, regional blowback, and economic crisis, we have to look back at the domestic front in the United States. We have to ask the uncomfortable question. Why launch this war right now? We need to dive into the massive domestic scandals that are currently unfolding, largely obscured in the shadows of this conflict.
This is where we have to analyze the timing and the potential concept of a calculated distraction.
Let's look at the hard data points raised by investigative reporters like Kim Iverson. First, we have the ongoing saga of the Epstein files. There are currently 65,527 pages of highly sensitive documentation regarding Jeffrey Epstein that are mysteriously being withheld by the Department of Justice.
Over 65,000 pages.
Yeah, but it gets much more specific. Iverson's reporting highlights the highly documented case of Tovin Noel, one of the prison guards who was on duty the night Epstein died. Forensic digital reporting shows she actively Googled Epstein an hour before discovering his body.
Which is incredibly suspicious on its own.
Even more shockingly, there is the revelation regarding her finances. J.P. Morgan flagged 12 highly suspicious deposits into her personal bank account, including a $5,000 cash drop just days before his death.
That level of financial anomaly, combined with the withheld DOJ files, is explosive enough to dominate news cycles for months. But it's just one thread of the domestic situation.
Right. Let's move from the justice system to the legislative branch. Iverson details a recent, staggering vote in the House of Representatives. 357 members of Congress voted to actively block the release of congressional sexual misconduct records. Only 65 members voted in favor of transparency.
Think about those numbers.
We are talking about the deliberate suppression of records detailing $18.2 million in taxpayer funds that were used to quietly settle sexual misconduct claims against lawmakers between the years of 1997 and 2017.
It's an overwhelming bipartisan effort to hide taxpayer-funded hush money.
And finally, a story that was almost entirely buried by the drumbeat of war. A massive $93 billion Pentagon spending spree that occurred last September.
We need to explain the mechanics of federal budgeting to understand why that happens. The United States federal fiscal year ends on September 30th. Government agencies operate on a use it or lose it mandate.
Oh, right.
If a department doesn't spend its entire allocated budget by the end of the fiscal year, Congress will often reduce their budget for the following year, assuming they didn't need the money. This creates a frantic, reckless rush to spend billions of dollars in the final weeks of September on literally anything.
And the documentation shows that this $93 billion wasn't spent on advanced interceptors or crucial body armor. We are talking about exorbitant contracts for premium steak, literal tons of crab legs, and luxury Herman Miller office furniture.
If we pull back and connect these seemingly disparate threads, the withheld Epstein files, the $18 million in suppressed congressional misconduct settlements, and the $93 billion in wasteful end-of-year Pentagon gluttony, a very dark institutional picture emerges. We have to seriously analyze the geopolitical theory of wag the dog.
Using a war as a distraction.
Historically, leaders and political institutions have frequently utilized sudden foreign conflicts to insulate themselves from severe domestic accountability.
Wait, hold on. Let me jump in here because we have to maintain perspective. We have had deep structural geopolitical tensions with Iran for over 4 decades.
Yeah.
You can't seriously be suggesting that the United States military launched a multi-trillion-dollar war, risking a global economic depression and regional destabilization just to push a prison guard's suspicious bank deposits or a vote on congressional hush money off the front page of the newspapers. That feels like a massive leap into conspiracy.
It is a massive leap if you are demanding a signed confession or a smoking gun email, explicitly laying out that strategy. You are likely never going to find a direct, causal paper trail that links a missile strike in the Middle East to a suppressed file in Washington. But dismissing it as mere conspiracy misses the broader sociological and institutional point. While a direct paper trail might not exist, the sheer timing of these events, combined with the shared beneficiary, which is an entirely insulated, unaccountable political class, breeds a profound, almost terminal level of public distrust.
The optics are undeniably terrible.
Exactly. When the public sees the government aggressively working together to hide decades of domestic misconduct records, while simultaneously launching a foreign war based on faulty, automated targeting data that kills schoolchildren, investigative channels must scrutinize the overlap.
People are going to ask questions.
The citizenry is watching a system that relentlessly protects its own wealth and secrets at home while projecting immense reckless force abroad. They naturally, and frankly rightfully, begin to connect those dots, leading to a massive crisis of institutional faith.
So as we look at this incredibly complex web of military technology, global economics, and domestic corruption, what is the ultimate takeaway for the people watching this unfold? Let's bring all of this together.
If there is one crucial, overarching lesson that you, the listener, need to carry through the rest of this week, it is this. The era of the cleanly contained, surgically executed foreign intervention is dead and buried.
It's over.
It's completely over. We are looking at a hyper-connected, incredibly fragile global system where every single action triggers a cascading, unpredictable, and often disproportionate reaction. Isolation is a complete illusion. Whether you are looking at the mathematics of maritime insurance rendering the waters of the Strait of Hormuz unnavigable, or the skies over a secret drone base in a Georgian UNESCO site, or the locked filing cabinets hiding settlements in the halls of Congress, it is all interconnected.
Yeah.
The targeted decapitation of a foreign leader doesn't cleanly end a war. It radicalizes an entire military-industrial complex. A technological failure in an automated targeting algorithm doesn't just destroy a school. It permanently loses the geopolitical narrative and fractures international alliances for a generation.
We expect warfare to operate like precision engineering. We expect the bad guy to be eliminated, the good guys to win, and the narrative to be clean and binary. But we are operating in absolute profound chaos. And as we dig through these reports, it leaves you with a lingering, deeply uncomfortable question. If an administration's foreign policy is built on flawed automated algorithms that result in mass civilian casualties, and its domestic policy is built on actively obscuring the truth about elite corruption and taxpayer misuse, at what point does the public completely and irreversibly detach from the official reality? How much longer can any government operate effectively or project power globally when the governed simply no longer believe a single word it says? If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again. Goodbye.